There's a general agreement between those who study the Jack the Ripper case as to who the victims were, more or less. Now, there were a series of murders spanning from 1888 to 1891, and these are referred to as the Whitechapel murders. The Canonical Five are included in the Whitechapel murders, but the Whitechapel murder victims are not generally considered victims of Jack the Ripper, although there's a slight difference of opinion in that some believe that a couple of the Whitechapel murder victims were actually victims of Jack the Ripper. So, who were the Canonical Five, and how did they come to be set apart from the other murders? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. There are various reasons for the difference in opinion of the identity of the Ripper victims. In 1888 in the East End, violence, particularly against women, was commonplace, and because the mutilations inflicted on the women increase in severity, this makes it difficult to determine exactly when they started. However, there are 5 women who most experts agree were victims of Jack the Ripper, and these are the Canonical Five, as termed by Martin Fido, the university professor and author of several books, in 1987. And they were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, murdered between August and November 1888. Polly Nichols was born Mary Ann Walker on the 26th of August 1845 near Fleet Street, London. At 18 she married William Nichols, and the two would go on to have 5 children together. In 1876 the then family of 5 moved to the Peabody Buildings, homes built specifically to alleviate the overcrowding in East End London by American financier George Peabody. In 1878, when Polly gave birth to their son Henry, a 21-year-old neighbour, Rosetta Walls, assisted her as a nurse, and the pair began to have problems after this, William later going on to state that this was due to Polly's drinking. Polly's father, however, would say that the marriage broke down as a result of William's affair with Rosetta. Whatever the reason, Polly left William in 1880, and William paid Polly 5 shillings a week in maintenance. In 1882, however, these payments stopped, and when questioned about this, William said that this was because Polly had taken up with another man, quote, living an immoral life. Polly's position of a woman in East End London in 1888 would have been precarious, but without the 5 shillings a week it would have been dire. Records show Polly living at the Lambeth Workhouse aside from a brief period in 1883 where she lived with her father. She may have lived with a man by the name of Thomas Drew between 1883 and 1887, but if this was the case it didn't last, because she showed up again in the workhouse registers after this. In May 1888, Polly left the Lambeth Workhouse to take up a position as a domestic servant to Samuel and Sarah Cowdrey in Rosehill Road, Wandsworth. She worked there for 3 months before leaving, and when she did, she was accused of stealing clothing. Polly began staying at Wilmot's lodging house, and for this she paid the price of 4 pennies per night. There she shared a bed with her friend Emily Holland, and 2 other women were also in the room with them. On the 24th of August 1888, she left Wilmot's to go and stay at another lodging house on Flower and Dean Street, which allowed both male and female lodgers. On the 30th of August 1888, Polly was seen walking down Whitechapel Road at approximately 11 p.m. She went to the Frying Pan public house, where she stayed until about 12:30 p.m, and in the early hours of the 31st of August 1888, she returned to Wilmot's, the lodging house on Thrall Street. At around 1:30 a.m, she was told by the house deputy to leave, as she didn't have her DOS money for the night. Polly left, laughing, and she asked the deputy to save her a bed, saying, "Never mind, I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." At 2:30 a.m, Polly saw her friend Emily Holland on the corner of Whitechapel Road. Now, Emily would later say that Polly was very drunk and she was staggering, struggling to stand up. Emily tried to get Polly to go back to Wilmot's lodging house with her, but Polly refused, saying, "I've had my DOS money 3 times today and spent it. It won't be long before I'm back." Emily left Polly, who headed up Whitechapel Road. At 3:15 a.m, PC John Thane walked down Bucks Row, reporting that he had seen nothing out of the ordinary. Sergeant Kirby walked down at the same time, reporting the same. Between 3:40 and 3:45 a.m, a man making his way to work came upon a woman lying on the ground in Bucks Row. Her skirts were pulled up around her waist, and although her face was warm, her hands were cold. The man, Charles Cross, called over another man by the name of Robert Paul, who discussed the woman, and they decided that they would go on to work but report their finding to the first policeman that they came across. At 4 a.m, Polly was discovered by PC John Neal, and PC Neal summoned a local doctor, Dr. Llewellyn, who pronounced her dead, though only recently. Polly was laid to rest on Thursday the 6th of September 1888 in the City of London cemetery. Eliza Ann Smith was born on the 25th of September 1840, the eldest of 5 children, in Paddington, London. On the 1st of May 1869, Annie married John James Chapman at All Saints Church in Knightsbridge. As an aside, for any of you not familiar with London, Knightsbridge is the really posh bit of London. That's where Harrods and all the posh shops are, a world away from Whitechapel and Spitalfields. Annie and John would have 5 children together. In 1881, Annie and her family moved to Windsor when her husband John took up a position as a coachman. However, tragedy struck in 1892 when their oldest daughter became ill and died from meningitis at the age of 12. And this allegedly drove both Annie and her husband John to drink, although Annie was allegedly worse for wear. Annie and John split in 1884. The couple's surviving daughter stayed with John, and John paid Annie 10 shillings a week in maintenance. In 1886, the payment stopped, and Annie learned that her husband had died, and the man she was reportedly living with left soon after. After this, Annie lived in several common lodging houses. She earned money by doing anti-massacres, some crochet work, selling flowers, and occasionally herself. In the early hours of the 8th of September 1888, Annie was turned out from the kitchen of the lodging house where she had been staying, as she didn't have the money to pay for her bed for the night. As she left, she said, "I won't be long, Brummy. Tell Tim to keep the bed for me." She left the lodging house, headed towards Spitalfields Market. A lady by the name of Elizabeth Long was probably the last person to see Annie alive. She saw Annie speaking to a man near 29 Hanbury Street at approximately 5:30 a.m. She described the man as being in his 40s, slightly taller than Annie, with dark hair and of a foreign, shabby genteel appearance, and wearing a brow, low-crowned felt hat and possibly a dark coat. She said she heard the man ask Annie, "Will you?" To which Annie replied, "Yes." Could this man have been the murderer? Annie's body was found outside 29 Hanbury Street by a resident, John Davis, at approximately 6 a.m. Davis told 3 nearby men about his discovery and told them to go and find a policeman. The 3 men left to find a policeman, encountering Divisional Inspector Joseph Linus Chandler, who they informed of the discovery. Annie was later identified by her brother, Fountaine Smith. Annie was laid to rest on Friday the 14th of September 1888 at the City of London Cemetery, Ilford. The funeral was kept secret from the public and only police and the family attended. Elizabeth Gustafsdotter was born near Gothenburg, Sweden, on the 27th of November 1843. In October 1860, she went to work as a domestic servant, and in early 1865 she was registered as a sex worker. On the 21st of April 1865, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter who was sadly stillborn. In July 1866, Elizabeth moved to England, and on the 7th of March 1869, she married John Stride, and the couple would go on to own and run a coffee shop. It appears that Elizabeth may have split from her husband by 1881, as she was registered as being treated in the Whitechapel Infirmary on the 28th of December 1881 for bronchitis, and from there she moved to the Whitechapel workhouse. She then lodged on and off at a common lodging house on Flower and Dean Street, and John Stride would pass away in October 1884. In 1885, Elizabeth began a 3-year relationship with a man named Michael Kidney, and Kidney would later describe this as a stormy relationship on account of Elizabeth's drinking, and that there were periods of time where she would leave him. Now, there's a record of Elizabeth at the Poplar Workhouse in March 1887, and in April 1887, she charged Kidney with assault, but she failed to appear in court. In September 1888, Elizabeth received financial assistance from the Swedish Church. Elizabeth returned to the lodging house on Flower and Dean Street in late September 1888 after arguing with Michael Kidney. At 6:30 on the evening of the 30th of September 1888, Elizabeth drank with a friend in the Queen's Head pub. They returned to the lodging house together, however Elizabeth left again between 7 and 8 o'clock. She was next seen by 2 men as she left the Bricklayers Arms pub near Berner Street, and these men would later say that she was accompanied by a man with dark hair, sandy eyelashes, a billycock hat and a morning suit and coat, and that she had stood in the entrance to the pub hugging and kissing this man. At 11:45 p.m, Elizabeth was seen again on Myrna Street, this time talking to a man in a black cutaway coat and a sailor's hat. Then again, almost an hour later, at 12:45 a.m, again on Myrna Street, with a man described as being 28 years old, wearing a dark coat and a deerstalker hat, and he was said to be carrying a package wrapped in newspaper, approximately 6 inches high and 18 inches long. Also at 12:45 a.m, a man by the name of Israel Swartz saw a man stop and speak to a woman he later believed to be Elizabeth Stride standing in the gateway. The man tried to pull Elizabeth onto the street and then threw her onto the footway. Swartz, not wanting to get involved, crossed over to the other side of the street, and he then saw a second man lighting his pipe, and the first man said, "Lipsky." And Lipsky was a Jewish slur at the time. Swartz walked away, but the second man followed him, and Swartz began to run. It may be that the other man was Lipsky. It may be that Lipsky was being shouted at Israel Swartz. It's not known. Elizabeth wouldn't be seen again until she was discovered by Lewis Deemschutz in Duffield's yard at 1 a.m, and it's believed that the Ripper was still there, hiding in the shadows of Duffield's yard, and escaped when Deemschutz went to get help. Elizabeth Stride was laid to rest at the East London Cemetery Company, Claidstow, London. Catherine Eddowes was born in Graiseley Green, Wolverhampton, on the 14th of April 1842. And when Catherine was a year old, the family moved to Bermondsey, London. Catherine's mother died in 1855 and her father in 1857. And at the age of 15, along with all of her siblings, she was admitted into the Bermondsey workhouse. Around 1861, Catherine met a retired soldier by the name of Thomas Conway, with whom she began a 19-year affair and had 3 children. Around 1868, it's said that Catherine began drinking, and this led to problems with the relationship with Conway. She left Conway, her common-law husband, in 1880. By 1881, Catherine was living in the Spitalfields area of East London with a man by the name of John Kelly, and she referred to herself as Kate Kelly. Kate worked doing cleaning, and it's also believed that she was an occasional sex worker. And she also did seasonal work hot picking in Kent with John Kelly. Hot picking was common then, and this was a sort of holiday for people living in the cities, where they could get away to the country, get some fresh air and earn some money. John and Kate had just returned from Kent hot picking in September 1888, which was earlier than usual because the crop had been poor following heavy rains that summer. It's interesting to note that on her return, Catherine Eddowes told a friend that she knew the identity of Jack the Ripper and that she was going to turn him in and collect the reward money. On Saturday the 29th of September 1888 at approximately 8:30, Catherine was taken into the Bishopsgate police station for being drunk. On her arrival, she was asked her name, to which she replied, "Nothing," and she was placed in a police cell where she soon fell asleep. At 1 a.m, it was determined that Catherine was sober enough to be released. Giving her name as Mary Ann Kelly, she said to the policeman that had released her, a PC Hut, "All right, good night, old cock." She would be found dead less than an hour later. According to records, Catherine was last seen alive at 1:35 a.m. by 3 witnesses who had just left the Imperial Club at Drake's Place, Duke Street. She was said to have been speaking with a man in a narrow walkway, Church Passage, which leads to Mitre Square. The man was described as being medium build, approximately 30 years old, 5'7", wearing a salt and pepper colour jacket, a grey peaked cloth cap and a reddish neckerchief, and he also had a fair moustache. Catherine was laid to rest in an unmarked grave on the 8th of October 1888 at the City of London Cemetery. Her family, along with hundreds of mourners, attended. Of the Canonical Five, least is known about Mary Jane Kelly. Most of the information we have about her came from her partner, Joseph Barnett, which he received second-hand from Mary Jane herself. So it's not known how much of the information is true or how accurate it is. And in fact, as no official records have ever been found, it's not known if Mary Jane Kelly was actually her real name. So Mary Jane was born in Limerick in Ireland. She had 6 or 7 brothers and 1 sister, and when she was a child the family moved to Wales. In 1879, at the age of 16, she married a collier, Davis, who was killed in an explosion 2 or 3 years later. She then moved to Cardiff, where she lived with a cousin and supported herself as a sex worker. In 1884 she went to London, where she worked in a high-class brothel in Knightsbridge and moved around at various places in London. She had a few relationships, one with a man by the name of Morganstone and another by the name of Joseph Fleming near Bethnal Green. She lived in various common lodging houses, and in 1887 she was living at Cooley's lodging house, where she met Joseph Barnett, a porter at Billingsgate Fish Market. And the two began living together quite soon after this, moving to Miller's Court in February 1888. Mary Jane and Joseph split up in October 1888 when he lost his job. Mary Jane returned to work in the streets, which Joseph wasn't happy about. And Joseph maintains that the two remained on friendly terms. In fact, he had visited Mary Jane on the evening before she died at around 8 p.m. At 11 p.m, she was seen at the Britannia pub, very drunk and drinking with a young, respectable-looking man with a dark moustache. At 11:45, she was seen walking down Dorset Street with a stout man, around the age of 35, 5 foot 5 inches tall, shabbily dressed, a blotchy face, side whiskers and a carroty moustache, in a long coat and a billycock hat. At 12:30 a.m, a neighbour heard Mary Jane singing in her room. At 1 a.m, Mary Jane was heard singing again. At 2 a.m, George Hutchinson would later report that he saw Mary Jane on Flower and Dean Street and she had asked to borrow sixpence from him. Very shortly after this, he saw Mary Jane with a man, and he would go on to give a very detailed description of this man to the police. However, there is some doubt about this evidence, as he didn't come forward until after Mary Jane's inquest. He claims to have followed the two to Mary Jane's room, then left as the clock struck 3. At 4 a.m, a neighbour was awakened and heard a faint cry of, "Oh, murder." This was apparently common for the time in the area, and she gave it no further thought. Another lady staying with friends there also heard this. Mary Jane would be found later that morning by her landlord's assistant trying to collect overdue rent. Mary Jane Kelly was laid to rest on the 19th of November 1888 in a public grave at St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone. So they're the canonical 5. As mentioned earlier, there is a general agreement that these were the victims of Jack the Ripper, but some also include Martha Tabor and Martha Turner, and I will do a future video about Martha as well. Next time we'll discuss some of the facts and the myths about the Jack the Ripper case, which may have contributed to some of the theories as to the identity of Jack the Ripper. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.